The Lord of the Rings, The Ring of Power Season 2 made multiple mentions of a specific point in Sauron's story, indicating that some never-before-seen moments will eventually be brought to the screen. This has been a significant draw for the Prime Video series since it is set during the Second Age of Middle-earth, a period typical Lord of the Rings adaptations don't cover. In fact, Sauron's entire character is far more conceptual than physical throughout Frodo's story. Now, Rings of Power has explored this villain in flesh and blood, but it seems the series will eventually take this even further. Sauron's Second Age character is evil through and through, and this has been a great deal of fun to watch in Rings of Power. Rather than simply hearing about the Dark Lord's horrible deeds as in The Lord of the Rings, Prime Video's prequel series has shown these moments in all their glory. Sauron has deceived and murdered, all while trying to convince himself and others that he is doing it for the betterment of Middle-earth. To hear him tell it, he is nothing compared to the villainy of Morgoth, and Sauron himself was only a victim of his master's evil, just like Middle-earth, but Rings of Power is sure to show the truth. Rings of Power hints that we will see good Sauron. Sauron wasn't always evil. Sauron, Charlie Vickers, smiling in The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Sauron tells Celebrimbor in Rings of Power Season 2 that he was forced to be evil by Morgoth and that with his Dark Master gone, he wants to heal Middle-earth. He repeats this same sentiment with Galadriel, explaining that he is the savior who can set things right again. Of course, this wouldn't actually be the case if Sauron got his way. He is evil, and his rule in Middle-earth would be evil too. However, the fact that he mentions his goodness and poor treatment under Morgoth so much in Rings of Power indicates that the series will eventually dive into his past in Valinor. The first 2 seasons of Rings of Power have opened up with flashback scenes to the days long before the Second Age. Season 1 included an overview of Morgoth's war with the elves, while Season 2 got started with Sauron's fall after Morgoth's defeat and his slow, slimy climb back to a physical form. It makes sense that Rings of Power Season 3 would also begin with a flashback scene, and after all the hints about Sauron's days as a good servant of the Valar in Season 2, it would make sense if this scene explored what the Dark Lord had been like back when he was called Mairon. Sauron's, or Mairon's, life and role in Valinor explained. Mairon was a Maia under the Valar All. A wide shot of Finrod looking at Valinor in the Rings of Power. Despite what he says to Celebrimbor and Galadriel in Season 2, Sauron is thoroughly evil in Rings of Power. However, it's easy enough for him to convince himself otherwise since this villain truly was good once upon a time. He had been an angel-like Maia called Mairon, living in Valinor along with her fellows and the Valar for endless centuries. Mairon, whose name means the Admirable, was a direct servant to the Valar All the Smith and was known to be a highly skilled craftsman who was fair, honorable, and trustworthy. Unfortunately, he didn't remain this way. In Tolkien's works, the power of creation is a slippery slope. Those who hold a talent for crafting beautiful things often develop the desire to do more, and Mairon is a prime example. This Maia valued balance, clarity, and perfection, and it was precisely this that made all he created so beautiful. However, when Mairon developed the desire to make Middle-earth and its beings balanced, pure, and perfect, this made him an easy target for Morgoth, known as Melkor in Valinor, and Mairon ultimately developed the belief that the Dark Lord's destruction was the perfect opportunity to build anew. How Sauron's downfall is likely to differ from what he described in Season 2. Sauron's version of what happened probably isn't going to line up with reality. It would be thrilling to see Sauron's time in Valinor as Mairon, a good and trustworthy being, brought to the screen in Rings of Power Season 3, or beyond, since such a thing has never been done before. Tolkien made it clear that Sauron wasn't created inherently evil but that his desire for impossible perfection took him down a dark path. The villain began to think that his own plan was more beautiful than that of Illuvators, and this wound up being his own doom. However, none of this is to say that Sauron was forced into evil by Morgoth. This may be what Sauron believes in Rings of Power, but a flashback would surely prove otherwise. Celebrimbor cheekily told Sauron that he was the true great deceiver since he could deceive even himself. In Rings of Power, Sauron tricks himself into thinking he would be any better than Morgoth, repeatedly noting that he hadn't followed the villain by choice. However, Celebrimbor's hint that this is a lie indicates that a future flashback will eventually reveal the truth. The Prime Video series would ultimately show how Sauron really came to be in Morgoth's service, and it is unlikely to paint the villain in the most flattering of lights. Can Rings of Power actually show Morgoth on screen? A Morgoth flashback might not be so easy to pull off. The Rings of Power explains Sauron and Morgoth's single biggest difference. Custom image by Simone Ashmore. A flashback scene showing Sauron Mairon as a good Maia in Valinor in future Rings of Power episodes would be especially interesting since this would likely require a look at Melkor Morgoth. This great villain has been repeatedly mentioned in the Prime Video series, especially in the 2 premiere flashback episodes of Seasons 1 and 2. However, Morgoth has yet to ever be shown on screen. Even the story of his time as the Dark Lord, the destruction of the two trees of Valinor, and the theft of the Silmarils was largely condensed and simplified in Rings of Power, perhaps for a good reason. Prime Video has limited rights to Tolkien's work since the author sold the adaptation rights to only The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Books like The Silmarillion, which outlines details of the First and Second Ages, were published after Tolkien's death, and these rights were never sold by his estate. Therefore, Rings of Power can only include stories and characters mentioned in those previous works. In Season 1, this didn't include the Silmarils. However, the fact that these stones were mentioned in Rings of Power Season 2 indicates Prime Video managed to obtain further rights.